Welcome again to Comfort Worms and Insects Farm, and today we are going to be discussing about feeding the worms, or basically composting, the materials that we use for composting, and what else maybe you can use, and also what not to use. So when we are talking about vermicomposting, we are basically talking about feeding worms different varieties of materials so that they can break that down and make that into an organic fertilizer. So when we are feeding worms, we get to be specific, though we mimic nature, because when we look out there are specific areas that we find the worms. And when we find worms in a specific area, it means they have food in that area. One of the areas that we naturally find worms, it's near cow dung, rabbit droppings, or even sheep or goat manure. So the same way, we use these materials as one of the ingredients or the feeds for the worms. Another area that we find the worms in large quantities, it's where there are materials that are breaking down or are decomposing. This can be near hedges, near compost piles, near dry materials which are composting. So all these areas are some of the areas that we find worms naturally. So when you see those or the worms in those areas, it means there is food for them. So the same way, when we are feeding our worms here, we focus on using these materials. So one of the items that we use, it's cow dung. We use dry materials that can be either hay, leaves from trees like avocado. We use green waste. This can be plants like tithonia, Russian comfrey. So generally leaves that are very tender and which will decompose very fast. So when we have that in mind, we are able now to come up with the right diet for our worms. And when we are doing that, we do a good balance, because we are looking at having the best quality compost. So we have to balance the amount of nitrogen and the amount of carbon that we use. So generally when we talk about carbon, we are talking of the dry materials that we use. So we have to have a good balance for the same. Then for the nitrogen, we have the cow dung, the plant waste. We are also looking at phosphorus and potassium from the plant waste. So we have to make sure that we have a good balance for the same. So in our case here, when feeding our beds or our worms, there are two ways or two approaches that we do. One, we push the materials that were already in the same bed, we push them towards one side, and then now we can introduce the feeds there and then cover on top with the material, the compost that was ready, so that now the worms can migrate and move into the fresh materials that they start composting. So that is the approach that we take. The second approach is first sieving all the materials that were ready, and then now after sieving, we can feed the empty bed with a combination of the materials that we had done. So we do mix, because now in this case we don't do or feed the worms in layers, but we mix all the materials that we want to compost and then feed them at once. So once we do that, we'll have fed our worms, and then we give them now time for them to break that down, and after the 6 to 8 weeks, we are ready now to start harvesting. And today we can just have the first or the feeding using the first approach, where we push the materials towards one side, then we press in the materials, and then now we cover on top, and then the worms will migrate to that area, and they start breaking that down. So we'll welcome Francis to help us with the feeding, so that you can see how we do this kind of feeding. So the materials that we are feeding today, this is cow dung plus plant waste. And what we look at when feeding or using these materials, we have to look at the moisture content. We also have to look at that combination, because we need to use the right moisture so that now the worms can be able to break that down within the 6 to 8 weeks, and also to make sure that the temperature is well controlled, and also to make sure that worms do not die because of the excess moisture. So whenever we are doing this feeding, we make sure we look at those parameters, because if we use the wrong moisture, it will affect the temperatures, which will kill the worms. That is, if the moisture is too low. If the moisture is too high, we might find that, or you will find that the worms will die because they won't be able to be breathing. So we have to control the moisture so much so that the worms can be able to thrive well, so that they can be able to populate, and also they can be able to break down the materials fed to them in the right way and in the right time. So that is the feeding process that we undertake, and those are the materials that we feed the worms. So there are other materials that we do not use while feeding our worms, and this ranges from anything acidic. It can be chicken manure, waste kitchen scraps like lemons, onions, oranges. So anything citric will kill the worms. So we avoid those materials to make sure that our worms are safe and they do not die.
So, yeah. Rise up in the morning, feel the soil in your hands. Every seed you're planting is a future that expands. You don't need the city lights to know that you are seen. Comfort, worms and insects, tunaishi pamoja. Sisi ni wakulima, tunaishi na ardhi, tunajenga kesho mikono yetu imari. No cap, hii ni legacy yetu. Organic life, that's the vibe, ndugu. Comfort, warmth and insects, tunaishi pamoja. Science of the soil, ardhi yetu ni bora. Empower the farmer.
So now that is the whole feeding process, and after that now we are going to give that material to be in that bed for 8 weeks, basically 2 months. Then I will be able to go now into the final stage where we do our sieving, so that we get now the final vermicompost. So thank you for following us, and for those who have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, kindly subscribe so that you can be able to learn more on our journey in vermicomposting and vermiculture, among other practices that we undertake as Comfort Worms. Thank you.
Twende pamoja sasa, mama alipanda, baba akalima, watoto wanakuwa, hadi naendelea. Comfort, worms and insects, tunaomba pamoja, tunaweza, kesho ni yetu.